Hi there, Presley. Hope you're doing great. Just going to make a quick video to offer you some feedback over your latest AP practice essay. This was the prompt about McTeague, the dirty dentist who opened his own parlor and engaged in some unsanitary practices, so to speak. And the prompt asked you to talk about the author's attitude towards McTeague and how that attitude is reflected in the, did I say author? I meant narrator. The narrator's attitude is reflected in the author's choice of things such as selection of detail and diction and syntax and tone and all those good things. Okay, since this is the first one of these, I'll just run you through real quick how they work. I try to make a quick video. I try to speak quickly. I try not to make them any longer than they need to be. Since that's the case, I might kind of zoom past things that may seem confusing to you. So if you need additional clarification about what I'm talking about in this video, please come see me in class. But the main gist is I talk about the things that the essay does well, great things that I see going on in your writing. Then I talk about some weak points or areas for refinement or improvement. And then I tell you what I scored it and why I scored it the way that I did. And yeah, I think that's it. So now that the formalities are out of the way, let's get started. Okay, let's start with what the essay does well. There are plenty of great things going on here. Number one, it's an in-depth essay. Your body paragraphs are nice and lengthy. They go in-depth into the prompt, and they've got plenty of analysis in there, so that's good. You follow slice format well. You've got your topic sentences in your body paragraphs, followed by your evidence, followed by your reasoning. So good job following slice format. Some people are still struggling to adapt to that, but you've got that. You've got that down pat. Your intro paragraph has an excellent example of the funnel down. You do a great job incorporating that into your writing. You start big, all people, all goals. And then talk about the limitations to those goals, and then you blend that kind of beautifully. You flow nicely into how McTeague fits under that umbrella as someone who has goals but is probably going to be limited by them. So just a phenomenal intro there. I feel like you did a good job of answering the prompt. You explain throughout your paper that the narrator has an attitude of pity, which is great. Okay, I agree with that, and it's specific. You don't just say the narrator has an attitude. Okay, you explain what that attitude is, and you consistently stick with that throughout the essay. So you don't wander away from your thesis. I have a lot of people that struggle. They wander away from the main point that they're talking about, and they forget that that's what they were talking about. I never got the sense in this essay that that was happening. I felt like you knew that you were arguing that the author's tone, or the author's attitude rather, was one of pity, and you kind of stuck with that throughout. Excellent job on all those things. I feel like there's some really good vocab in here. Okay, I particularly liked the use of the word commiseration in your final body paragraph. And there's other areas that I've marked where I felt like you had some strong writing going on overall. Okay, so those are all excellent things. Keep those up. Let's talk now about areas where the essay may stumble, or things that we want to focus on as we move forward and strengthen our writing. You'll notice that I've marked some numbers here. By the time you see this video, you should have the paper in your hand that explains what those are. They're just grammar errors. As long as you don't have too many of them, they're not a huge deal. But if I do notice recurring grammar errors, I tend to point them out. Again, they're not huge, but if you have too many of them in your paper, it'll work against you. So I'll let you go through and figure out what most of these mean. I do want to focus real quickly on threes, because it is something that I noticed going on a lot in your paper. It's kind of a unique thing that you have going on. Threes are just unnecessary commas. We have a tendency to put commas, let me rephrase that. We have a tendency to assume that a comma is synonymous with a pause, right? So if I put a comma in the paper, it is a moment where I take a breath when I'm speaking. But that is not the case. Commas are not necessarily pauses. Sometimes they stand in as pauses, and sometimes they don't. And so, like, if you're going to put a comma in your sentence, make sure the reason is not just that you're pausing. So this sentence here, the words specifically chosen by the narrator when describing McTeague exemplify how the narrator does feel sympathy. You don't need this comma here. It interrupts the flow of the sentence. You you don't want to put a comma between your subject and your verb, right? So your subject is the words. The words exemplify how the narrator does feel sympathy. You have a few of those sprinkled throughout, so just make sure you're paying attention to your comma usage, and that when you put a comma in your paper, that it's not just because you feel like there should be a pause there. And then the other thing that's kind of small. The overarching thing that we want to focus on is something I call clunky or awkward wording, and it's kind of this umbrella term that I use to kind of embody. There are times when a sentence is just not. It doesn't move as fluidly as it could. So it's basically, everyone's familiar with this sensation as a writer. Like you know what you're trying to say, but the words that you're putting down don't seem to quite be what's going on in your head. So there was a lot of instances where I could see that coming out in your writing. And so what causes it? There's a number of things that cause it, and it's something that you just kind of work on over time. Learning more vocab, for example, is one of the key ways to fight this. Learning how to say things differently, kind of move words around in a different way to say the same thing. That's another way to address it. I'll go over let me go over just one example in here. I've highlighted several throughout. Actually, let's go over a couple. Let's focus on this same example here that I was looking at, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So if we look at this sentence, the words specifically chosen by the narrator when describing McTeague exemplify how the narrator does feel sympathy. Okay, the clunkiness is in the beginning of the sentence. You have too many words that separate your subject and your verb. Specifically, if you want me to dive into linguistics here, you have too many prepositional phrases in between your subject and your verb, and that makes it clunky. It's not that you can't ever put a prepositional phrase in between your subject and your verb, but you've got a few here, right? The words specifically chosen by the narrator when describing McTeague. So we've got two there, and we've got kind of this clause attached here, specifically chosen. I'm not sure what to classify that as, but there's too much going on, and you've got this clunkiness at the beginning of your sentence, and that's why you put this comma in here, because you've said all these things that you kind of want to get out, because you feel like you have to get them out here in the beginning, and they actually get in the way of expressing yourself clearly. So the way to do this is to just cut away words that are unnecessary and move things around and strive for a better word choice, all those things that I was just talking about. I've given you an example here just to show you what I mean. We can change this and say the same thing in fewer words if we say, quote, the language in the narrator's description of McTeague exemplifies how the narrator does feel sympathy. And I didn't put it in here, but even this phrasing, how the narrator does feel sympathy, is awkward wording, because I can think of a better way to word that. The language in the narrator's description of McTeague exemplifies the narrator's sympathy. Now I've said the same thing in fewer words. I don't have the tabulator in front of me, but I know it's less wordy than the way this is, right? The way the sentence is currently structured. And so if you have a sentence or two in your essay that's like that, it's not a huge deal. But the problem is when that becomes a habit in your writing, and your writing as a whole, each sentence is 2 or 3 words longer than it needs to be, or 3 or 4 words longer than it needs to be. Then you wind up with essays that are too wordy, and it's like the meaning of what you're trying to get across to your audience is being hidden in all of these extra phrases and clauses that you don't need. So the main thing I want you to focus on, if you don't take anything away from this video, is how to address awkward wording. I want you to really look out for awkward wording, and I want you to focus on saying things as clearly and concisely as possible, because oftentimes if you can say something in fewer words, it is by default easier to understand to your audience. All right. I'll give you another example here of awkward wording. So there are times when I can tell what you're trying to tell me, and I can tell that it's just kind of you're just kind of struggling to say it. And then there are other times when I'm not sure what you're trying to say because the phrasing is too awkward. So if we look at this example here, while McTeague may be viewed as ignorant and unable, the narrator points out that he is not mean or evil. That's fine. And then this sentence, this considerations provides to the idea of pity. That is, it's the wrong verb. I don't know how to, it's just awkwardly worded in a way where I'm not sure what you're trying to say. I think you're trying to tie it to the narrator's pity that they feel for McTeague, and we can see this by their consideration of the good traits of McTeague's character. But the way the sentence is worded here is just too awkward, and it's unclear what exactly you're trying to mean. I have to guess at what you're going for, and anytime your reader has to guess what you're trying to say, that's a bad sign, because the goal of writing is to communicate clearly so that your audience doesn't really have to guess. They know what you mean, and you mean what you say, right? Okay, I've estimated the score for this as a 4. That's about where I expect most people to be in this at this point in the semester. If we're just starting to write these things, I feel like if you can score in the 4 to 5 range consistently at the beginning, you're good. What's keeping it from the 5 range is that awkward wording that I'm talking about. So if you can address that in your paper, it'll bump this up to a 5. And then I also think that this is what keeps it from being in that upper 3rd range, because the only thing that differentiates 5s from 7s, 8s, 6s, 7s, 8s, and 9s is the quality of analysis. But you can't have quality analysis until you have a strong enough command of language where your analysis isn't awkwardly worded. So I really feel like this is the key to pushing you up into that upper 3rd. Is to just focus on awkward word choicing. Now, again, that's a broad umbrella. It's difficult. It might be difficult to revise on your own. So if you need help, if you don't understand why something's awkwardly worded, or you don't understand how to fix something that's awkwardly worded, come up to me in class, or we can schedule some time during my planning block to go over this. I'd be more than happy to work with you. But yeah, okay, I have rambled on long enough for this video. Hopefully that was helpful. If you need additional help as you're revising your essay, come see me in class. All right, I think that's it. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in class very soon.